Before we continue with the subject, I want to address some things. First of all, just to make sure we're on the same page here, this video is dedicated to a substance which is scheduled almost worldwide, with a couple of exceptions. It should be obvious that I'm not promoting its use. What I am promoting, though, is doing your own research and self-education. Secondly, in this video I'm going to be talking about more objective facts and current state of research on DMT. If you're interested in my personal experience and my attitude towards the substance, that's great, because I will be dealing with those in the next part. I would still recommend watching this part, especially if you're not familiar with DMT and how it works, for a better sense of context and general education purposes. Thirdly, I tried to keep the facts straightforward and structured while keeping the pacing somewhat entertaining and with character. This is not a purely hard facts and serious science type of material. There are actual scientists researching the topic, and I'm clearly not one of them. Check the links if you want to see the articles and research statistics that I may have omitted or misinterpreted in the video. With this, let's begin. Exactly what substance I'm talking about and why it's important to know the difference. Some issues can occur resulting from a confusion of two related but nevertheless very different substances, NN-DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. The one I'm dedicating this video to specifically is NN-DMT, as it is the more widely known and influential of the two. It's one of the components of the famous ayahuasca brew and the DMT most commonly referred to by various influential philosophers and psychonauts. And while 5-MeO is also a very interesting compound on its own, we won't be discussing it in detail here. However, there's one thing you definitely should know. NN-DMT and 5-MeO have different active dose ranges, NN-DMT being approximately 3 to 4 times less potent. This, combined with the lack of education fueling the confusion of the two substances, gives precedence to a lot of cases where people have taken 5-MeO in amounts far greater than recommended. Considering the different nature of the experiences these substances produce, and the fact that both of them have a short-term effect on blood pressure and heart rate, and the effect of course increases with the dose, you probably see how this can lead to unpleasant consequences. So know your substances. It can save experiences and health of many people to come. From now on, I will be referring to NN-DMT by just DMT. Now, to the specifics. DMT is a psychedelic substance with a long history of shamanic use in the Amazonian tribes, mainly in the form of ayahuasca brew, in which plants containing DMT are combined with Banisteriopsis carpi vine. This plant, along with a slew of possible substitutes, contains various harmine alkaloids, which act as monoamine oxidase inhibitors, or MAOI for short, compounds that are able to make DMT orally active. Considering the incredibly vast selection of floral forms found in the Amazon, the ability of shamans to come up with the recipe, identifying a couple of plants that would be exactly right for the goal, is truly impressive. Shamans say it's the plants themselves who told them the right way. However, the history of DMT would not end here. In the 20th century, pure DMT has been synthesized in lab conditions. Its effects were studied and new methods of usage emerged: vaporization and injection, both intravenous and intramuscular. They became the quote-unquote norm of contemporary DMT use, with smoking being prevalent. While there is technically one more way to take DMT, it being insufflation, due to immense discomfort it causes, this method does not see much use at all. We will mostly be concerned with smoking or injection, as, once again, those are the ways the substance is being used in most of the cases. Also, the effects these routes of administration produce are different to those one can expect when taking the more historically accurate approach of ingesting DMT combined with various MAOI compounds. DMT is generally considered to be one of the most powerful psychedelics known today. And it is important to understand the distinction between powerful and potent. Potency of a psychoactive compound is measured by its effective dose threshold, and in this regard DMT is decent, but not particularly outstanding. The most common dose range stated for smoked DMT starts from 20 milligrams, while for example LSD, one of the most potent psychedelics, in its widespread blotter form, is commonly taken in doses from 50 micrograms and up. However, when it comes to power, that is, subjective mental impact of the experience, DMT is left with almost no equals except for 5-MeO and Salvia divinorum. And even though, just like I said, the power of an experience is a highly subjective matter, when you consider personal reports of those who tried DMT, and various studies conducted to document and systematize these accounts, the profoundness of the experience in question can hardly be ignored. For example, the famous study led by Rick Strassman from 1990 through 1995 provided opportunities to rigorously analyze the effects DMT has on mentally healthy individuals. 60 volunteers have been subjected to, in total, about 400 intravenous injections of DMT solution over the span of the 5-year endeavor. Not only the pharmacological aspect was interesting, in that DMT was found to be unable to develop tolerance to its psychological effects on users. The quality of the internal experience was such that, quote, "The higher dose effects completely replaced ongoing mental experience and usually was described as more compelling and convincing than ordinary reality or dreams." The study and its results inspired Rick to write the book by the name of DMT, the Spirit Molecule, with a documentary film based on it following in 2010. This gave birth to one of DMT's more widely known monikers. Another, more recent study, conducted in 2012, took 1,000 user reports of experiences with 10 different psychoactive substances from a large drug information portal, Erowid, and processed them in order to find the words most commonly used to describe an experience with a specific compound. Then, the substances were paired accordingly with word clusters. For example, the reports of the widely known and popular empathogen, MDMA, were most commonly put, rather unsurprisingly, with clusters of words such as club, hug, rub, and smile. LSD and psilocybin mushrooms, the usual go-to psychedelics, were associated with see, look, room, tell, ask, walk, house, and such. What about DMT? Well, it was paired, along with Salvia divinorum, with clusters of words such as reality, dimension, universe, state, consciousness, form, and entity. So, what are the specifics of the experience then? Usually, the goal of taking DMT is to reach the so-called breakthrough, which occurs when the smoked substance is taken in doses of about 30 plus milligrams. This number accounts for a case in which DMT is vaporized very efficiently. Lower doses would provide a lighter, easier, less subjectively profound experience. These are the effects commonly attributed to breakthrough doses, and they can get a glimpse into why this is called a breakthrough. Intense open-eye visuals and kaleidoscopic patterning, radical perspective shifting, feelings of euphoria, replacement of the reality with a new one, immersion into another worlds, out-of-body experiences, meeting sentient entities, dissolution of the self, seeing intensely bright light and or being moved through a tunnel, supposedly into another world, and, in general, profound life-changing spiritual experiences. Interestingly, these coincide rather strongly with various descriptions of near-death experiences. Rupert Sheldrake, an English author, biologist, and researcher of parapsychology, posited that DMT may not be simply a psychedelic, but rather a necroptic substance, that it simulates the experience of death and what happens afterwards, as, theoretically, DMT is secreted in large quantities when a person approaches death. However, there does not seem to be enough scientific evidence for that, so I'll leave the topic for future discussion in more appropriate context. And all these fascinating characteristics have not only facilitated a long history of predominantly safe use of the substance in native tribes. Currently, there are two Brazil-based religious groups, União de Vegetal and Santo Daime, which have officially made ayahuasca-type drinks their religious sacrament. While we're on the point, I'll allow myself to go for a little tangent. There is also the Native American Church, whose members are officially permitted to transport, possess, and use peyote, another powerful psychedelic with a rich history of mostly safe use, which is nevertheless controlled and/or scheduled in a lot of countries. Back to DMT and ayahuasca, though. Considering that the followers ingest these psychedelic beverages on a regular basis, it would be very interesting to see how good these people fare health-wise. A psychiatric study of União de Vegetal's members, led by Charles Grob in 2010, concluded that they were healthier than average, with ayahuasca proposed as an effective cure for depression. Also, the 2015 study of 22 regular users of ayahuasca and 22 controls has shown, through MRI, that there were some detectable differences in cortical thickness in certain brain areas between the two groups. Quote, "Thinning was observed in the ayahuasca-using group in 6 cortical areas: the middle frontal gyrus, the inferior frontal gyrus, the precuneus, the superior frontal gyrus, the posterior cingulate cortex, and the superior occipital gyrus. On the contrary, thickening was found in the precentral gyrus and in the anterior cingulate cortex. Cortical thickness values in the posterior cingulate cortex were inversely correlated with the intensity and duration of prior use of ayahuasca and with scores on self-transcendence, a personality trait measuring religiousness, transpersonal feelings, and spirituality. Although direct causation cannot be established, these data suggest that regular use of psychedelic drugs could potentially lead to structural changes in brain areas supporting attentional processes, self-referential thought, and internal mentation. These changes could underlie the previously reported personality changes in long-term users and highlight the involvement of the posterior cingulate cortex in the effects of the psychedelics. Please consider, though, that such a drastic noticeable effect on physical size of brain areas is mostly due to the fact that the study subjects were regular long-term users. Each one of them has taken ayahuasca in average 123 times prior to the study. However, this goes to show DMT's potential to quantitatively influence brain's physical structure. And even if a person most probably won't have their brain undergo observable physical restructuration after taking DMT one time in any of the possible methods, there still is a much more physically subtle but still very significant effect DMT and other psychedelics may have on the human brain: facilitating neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to create, reform, and reorganize neural connections throughout life. This ability is crucial for the brain when it comes to adapting to the environment and compensating for injury. Also, neuroplasticity is the factor on which learning and memory directly depend. One of the primary targets of DMT and other psychedelics is the 5-HT2A neuroreceptor, along with 5-HT2C, 5-HT1A, and others. This is what research has to say on neuroplasticity-inducing potential of 5-HT2A-focused psychedelics. Hallucinogens which target the 5-HT2A receptor can influence cellular functioning via the activation of G proteins and secondary messengers. The signaling pathways mediated by the 5-HT2A receptor include the activation of PKC and MAPK, protein kinases which energize enzymes to perform complex cellular maintenance. The activation of PKC undoubtedly plays an active role in the production and maintenance of long-term memory. Evidence shows that inhibiting PKC activation in the cortex for as little as few hours can cause the rapid erasure of long-term memory associations. The addition and removal of phosphates to and from proteins, this process is also known as phosphorylation, is a fundamental part of all organic metabolic processes. 5-HT2A agonists stimulate this phosphorylation process through PLC, IP3, calcium 2+, and subsequent PKC activation. Although there are multiple factors responsible for hallucinogenesis, psychedelic stimulation of PKC activity undoubtedly plays a role in perturbing and stimulating persistent memory functions and promoting potential potent neuroplasticity. Of course, all can't be this simple and nice. As with any other psychedelic, there is a high potential for detrimental consequences with DMT. Although it is not toxic in the slightest and no deaths from the direct effect of DMT have been reported, there are a few documented instances of lethal outcomes due to DMT being mixed with incompatible substances upon use. Also, just like the majority of psychedelics, DMT may increase the severity of already observable or dormant schizophrenia and associated disorders. There have been theories and studies related to the direct involvement of DMT in schizophrenia, but the results are inconclusive. Less critical and theoretically reversible negative effects may occur due to the extremely intense nature of the experience, which may lead to temporary depression, anxieties, and overall difficulties in effectively processing and integrating the experience. What it comes down to, always remember to do as much research as you can if, for any reason, you are planning to take any sort of psychoactive substance. A note on the differences between pure DMT and ayahuasca. One more thing I would like to briefly cover is the difference between effects of pure DMT and a combination of DMT with MAOI, as in ayahuasca. While smoked or injected DMT produces an extremely short, intense, reality-challenging trip, ayahuasca and similar brews have a milder but much longer experience which purportedly has a more grounded focus and feeling, making it simpler, but not necessarily easier, to integrate the experience into everyday life. Also, the act of drinking ayahuasca is commonly accompanied by a ritual fast and a shamanic ceremony, which, as you can guess, adds a very strong, specific connotation to the process. It is a very interesting subject, but right now I don't feel like I have enough knowledge to be able to elaborate on it further, so for now let's leave it at this. And this is pretty much the more or less objective account of DMT I've been able to put together. It's not all I have to say in it, and in the next part of the video I'll be dealing with the personal experiences, the more subjective thoughts and philosophical implications. So yeah, I would really like to hear some feedback on this because the subject is deeply fascinating for me, and this video in particular, it's the one I've done the most research for so far, and I've learned an immense amount in the process. So yeah, don't forget to leave likes or comments or express feedback in any way, shape, or form, because it just helps me seeing when this information actually reaches to someone. I hope this was interesting and